Okay, well, Sharam, we're ready to...
Let's get going.
Let's go. Okay. Well, good afternoon. Welcome. Salam alaikum. My name's Alistair Roth. I'm Executive Director of AIIA Victoria. So I'd like to welcome you all, both here and our online audience, to this co-hosted panel between AIIA Victoria and the Middle East Studies Forum at Deakin. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet here and where other online, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. So we're here to talk about Australia's relations with the Middle East. I think many people still view the Middle East through the prism of 2 decades of military operations. But apart from the continuing geopolitical importance of the region and its necessity to world peace and security, there's growing trade, particularly with the GCC countries. And in terms of people-to-people links, Arabic is the 3rd most spoken language in Australia. So this is an ideal time to explore how the region's complex and dynamic landscape affects Australia's interests and how best our policy making can take advantage of opportunities and mitigate risks. So we have a fantastic panel here to discuss this. I'll introduce them. I'll start with our good friend, Professor Sharam Akbalzadeh, who will be the moderator. He's convener of the Middle East Studies Forum. We have then Professor Sally Totman, political scientist specializing in Middle East and North Africa, and currently the head of the School of Social Work and Arts at Charles Sturt University, so has come here from New South Wales. Dr. Roger Shanahan, next, former army officer with service with the UN in South Lebanon, Syria, and East Timor, in Beirut during 2006 war, and in Afghanistan. He's been associate professor at ANU's National Security College and a research fellow at the Lowy Institute. We then have Mr. Roland Jabbour, OAM. Roland's the director of the National Board of the Australian Arab Chamber of Commerce and Industry, honorary consul of the Kingdom of Morocco in Victoria, and a leading light with many other councils, the Australia Arabic Council, the Australia Lebanon Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and Australia Oman Business Council. And James Bryan, kindly here from Canberra, is with DFAT. James is director of the Levant section in the Middle East and Africa division, previous postings in Malaysia, and also working on implementation of the Iraq and Syria task force and Australia's engagement in the ISIL coalition. So thank you all for your interest. Thank you to the panelists for coming, and I will hand over to Sharam.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Alistair. Welcome, everybody. It is a delight to be co-convening this event with AIIA. This is a very important area to discuss, to explore. As Alistair mentioned, Australia has a lot of links with the Middle East. We have been involved in military operations in the region. We have trade with the region, and obviously migration is also happening, and through that, cultural links. But the question that I think remains is, how does all of this fit into Australia's overall thinking of how it should engage and relate and connect with the Middle East? So in terms of priority, in terms of where it's located. So I'm going to start with a big question to set the context for the discussion, and that's to James, if you don't mind. James Bryan, representing DFAT. Get the mic ready, James. So the question is, why does the Middle East matter for Australia?
Thank you, Sharam, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Look, I think, obviously there's a lot of focus these days in Australian foreign policy circles on the Indo-Pacific, and that's largely how we frame how we look at the world and our strategic environment. And I think that, coupled with the fact that we have seen a drawdown in our military presence in the Middle East, has seen some suggest that the Middle East is, of diminishing importance to Australia, but I think that's not the case at all. just sort of thinking of the big picture level, obviously, Middle Eastern countries are particularly important to the geostrategic location. They're big oil producers, and I think they'll be critical sort of countries when we look at the transition to, a future green economy. There's humanitarian challenges in the region. And of course, despite the kind of territorial defeat of ISIS, the terrorism threat endures. And so there's a number of reasons why, the region is still important. When we think about it in the Middle East branch, there's no sort of formal way we sort of decide we think about the region, but often we tend to kind of divide it into three streams of thinking, and one security, the other's economic, and the other's kind of our global and multilateral interests. I think it's been said already, there's obviously great economic importance in the region. Trade and investment ties have really grown. Our teams were looking at some of the stats, and trade with the Middle East as a whole, I think, is about on par with our trade with Indonesia and with Vietnam, and it exceeds that of our trade with a number of sort of, I think, 5 of the ASEAN partners that we have. So, it's really not insignificant, it's growing. Important agricultural export markets, aviation ties have really grown, as people would know. And I think the Gulf obviously has a number of sovereign wealth funds, I think 4 of the top 10 in the world, and they'll be really important for the kind of investment Australia needs, for its infrastructure needs, and also its own, energy transition. On the security side, the terrorist threat endures. There's no doubt about that. We've transitioned, I think, and we've drawn down our troops, but we still have important engagements in the region. Defence and security agency cooperation, are still very advanced and developed, focusing not just on terrorism, but on people smuggling and things like transnational crime. Very good relationships with a number of the countries. And Australia takes part in this counter-terrorism fusion platform in Jordan called Operation Gallant Phoenix, which is doing a lot of important sort of quiet work to keep us safe, that, is not in the limelight, but a really important contribution. And finally, I guess the sort of global and multilateral lens, all Middle Eastern countries vote on important resolutions, and they vote on candidacies. And, Australia's got quite an active agenda, promoting human rights and action on climate change, and also just seeking to uphold, important rules and norms. And Middle Eastern countries can be partners on that. They may be unhelpful on those sorts of things, but that's why it's important to have relationships and have the discussions that we do. And, we've got quite a big diplomatic presence still in the region, very active presence. So I guess a few other final thoughts, just quickly. The diaspora is an important element, of our engagement with the region. One of the countries in my patch is Lebanon, and people would know we have a very big Lebanese Australian population, and many live in Lebanon at any one time, and even more in the summer months, I believe. And that also has consular dimensions. And so, there's many different ways in which, we engage the region, and it remains important. The final thing I'll say is there's particular issues. Another one in my patch, which is the Israeli-Palestinian file, that sort of have outsized political attention, not only domestically, but also in the UN. And so, an enormous amount of work for Australia on issues like that.
Thank you, James. Could I invite Roland to also reflect on why the Middle East matters to Australia?
Thank you, Professor, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. I think James has very comprehensively, covered all of these strategic areas that connect Australia with the region, and as to why we do have that focus on the region, and why is that region important to us here in Australia. I think the important question is how are we pursuing those interests? There's no question about it that all of the areas mentioned by James are important. We often focus on trade, and we say, the reason why we should be dealing with the Middle East because we've got $15 billion worth of trade exchange with the Gulf region. And I often said to our governments it needs to extend beyond that. And I think James covered a number of those areas. So often we need a vote for a country that is not really significant for us in terms of trade. And trade should not only be the only focus, although we should be diversifying. And we should not continue to focus, despite the importance of our traditional trading partners, and we want to maintain those relationships. I think diversification is a good strategy, and everybody would agree with that. And the Middle East region represents an excellent opportunity for us to diversify. The question is, do our foreign policy settings reflect that national interest as a nation? We are often driven by foreign policies of other countries that we're influenced by, which may serve their own national interests, but not necessarily are in line with our national interest as a nation. Are we making a sufficient investment to realise that potential that exists for us in that part of the world, where we are welcomed with open arms? We have an excellent reputation. We are perceived very positively as being quality destination. We are stable, we are secure, and we are consistent. We are a nation that is so wealthy. We are a huge continent, and we have a very small population. So in terms of infrastructure, we are very limited to the extent to which we can implement infrastructure. We collect less than 20% of our water. We have a vast continent. We have the potential to be the food basket of the world. In order to do that, you need to attract foreign investment. I think James alluded to the sovereign wealth funds that exist in the Gulf region, and they are more than $1 trillion, and they are investing left, right, centre globally. What are we doing to attract that foreign investment so that they can come in, build the infrastructure, and then we can utilise our vast land and resources? We're often confronted with a level of conservatism that we're going to be invaded. And I often say to our decision makers, we continue to have legislative powers. We will continue to have the ability to legislate to protect our national interest. It's getting over that conservative approach, if you like, and getting over the domestic politics. Often we have change of governments, especially over the last 10 years or so. We have governments are governing for the short term, and they're making decisions are not necessarily strategically long term, but they are decisions which are able to be sold domestically and to be justified domestically. In order to realise that potential, there needs to be a willingness to make a significant investment to realise that potential and to be able to get a return on it. I've been working with government, and I've been working in this space for many years, and I tend to feel frustrated because I can see the potential. I come across it every day. When I visit the region, people say to me, why don't you bring your people over? I talk to decision makers in the region. I see their graduation certificates behind them. Britain, the United States, everything around that minister is British. His advisors, his systems, the equipment, the cars that he drives. I've worked very, very, very hard on international education. We've started to attract international students. They've become our ambassadors. They're going back now. They are displaying their Australian university degrees. They are communicating with Australia. The potential we have in the area of international education, it's an untapped area. We're only scraping the surface. At one stage, we managed to attract up to 30,000 students from the King Abdullah Scholarship Program alone, which was a total of 140,000 international students. It got to a stage where they were saturated. There was too many of them, and they weren't getting the experience that was intended by their scholarships, and that is to mix in a foreign environment. The Cultural Office budget for that year was $500 million, because that scholarship included the student, all of his family, and family members are covered. So there's enormous potential. What are we doing to realise that potential? To me, that is the important question. We are so well positioned, we don't need to try very hard. Thank you.
So I'm going to actually invite James to reflect on the points that Roland has made. Is Australia taking advantage of the opportunities offered in the region? What are we doing and what can we do better?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Roland, for your thoughts. There's always things people can be doing better, and decisions over where we invest and where we put our sort of diplomatic energies, are also, hotly debated, I think, including within our system. I think there have been some success stories and areas where we have, seized opportunities. You sort of touched on those, often in the economic sphere. And education is one of those. You mentioned, I don't know, we talked about it earlier, some of the work you've done yourself to make people aware of the opportunities in the Gulf. I know we have campuses, there's Australian campuses there, increasing numbers of students from the Gulf coming and studying in Australia. So I think that's an area where we've seized opportunities. The aviation ties that have grown a lot are sort of another. I think there's a few specific examples recently that I'll just sort of share with you because they're interesting. I mean, people are aware of the trade measures that China imposed on Australia in recent years. Barley was one of the products struck by those, and I understand that we were quite successful drawing our relationships and the engagement in the Middle East in diverting a number of those sort of barley exports to the Gulf, and I think that was quite successful. And in recent years, there's been a shortage of diesel exhaust fluid in Australia, and the call went out looking for sort of stocks around the world. And again, we were able to alleviate some of the pressures on our stocks through relationships we had in the Gulf, sourcing them from there. So, there are things we do and things we can achieve, I think, through our relationships and engagement in the region. I talked about, Operation Gallant Phoenix before. I think that's a really good example. We have quite a big presence in Jordan and a good relationship with them, and I think that paved the way for our involvement in that platform. But there's certainly more we could do. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, attracting investment, in sort of renewable energy and the transition that we need to make with our economy. Yeah, I think, another example, I'll give you one final one. I think the crisis in Sudan that we saw earlier this year, I believe, and a lot of attention was on Cyprus as the sort of launch pad for evacuations of Australians. But in fact, a number came through the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Excellent cooperation with those governments, and our diplomatic missions there were very busy. And so I think there was engagement from the ADF sort of basing presence in the UAE as well. And so it just underscores the importance of that engagement, that presence that we have in the region. They're just a few examples, but.
Thank you. Well, I don't want the conversation to be one-sided here, so I'm going to turn to my left now. Roger, what's your reflections on what Australia could do better in the region?
Thanks very much. I mean, as James said, there's always things that you could do better, and there's always competing interests, and always will be competing interests, not only for resources but for people's attention. I suppose if we look at our attitudes towards the Middle East pre 2001 and post 2001, you'd probably say that net Australia has a better understanding of the region. We have better diplomatic representation, additional 3 embassies in the region that we didn't have prior to that, and that gives you a permanency that allows you to build up the people-to-people links, that allows you to then leverage off those to raise people's awareness and key decision makers' awareness in the region about a whole range of things, and that includes economic opportunities, which I know we all focus on, or government focuses on, but it has to focus on to a certain extent. And yes, very much so that half of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world are in the Gulf, but there's also a cautionary note there that unlike commercial trade, FDI, foreign direct investment, can move around quickly. So you need to ensure that if you attract the foreign direct investment, that you maintain the relationships and don't expect it to be a given, because if you're investing your money in a market and you decide that market's not giving you the return that you want anymore, it's a simple commercial decision, you're going to stop investing in that market. And I think if, back to the original question, some of the ways that we could improve in the region, and I think Roland touched on it, and one of the frustrations certainly when I was there with the government is it's often seen as a pass-through destination. You stop there very briefly. If you're a minister, I'm talking at the senior government level, you stop there briefly, if at all, and continue on to where you're really going. but with just a little more effort and a little bit more understanding on the part of key decision makers. And it's not for lack of trying from diplomatic posts in the region. People understand that Australia is very distant geographically from the region, so people stopping over, or key decision makers or politicians stopping over and engaging with their counterparts, can have a disproportionately positive effect, because people in the region do understand that. I'll say one of the things also about what are we doing well but could do better, I think, in terms of DFAT. While we have opened an additional 3 posts over the last 20 years, the people that are going as heads of mission and deputy heads of mission in the region now, I would say, more so than 20 years ago, are experienced in the region before they get there. So they're able to, if not build on pre-existing links, then they already understand the operating environment before they get there. That's something that is, I can't understate the benefit of that. It can be a very complex region. So if you're learning on the job, it means you're less effective from the start. But if you're experienced in the region, might be in a different country, but coming back to the region, you understand the potential pitfalls for government. You understand the political and social dynamics that allows you to report back on what's going on in the region and steer Australia in the right direction in a much better way than if you had come in cold turkey, or that if DFAT had considered that area of secondary importance, and so you just posted people there before you posted them off to somewhere else. So yes, we can always do things a bit better, but I think at the micro level, or the in the region level, I think we're much more mature in our approach to the region than we were 20 years ago. And as Roland said, we do have changes of government, but that is just a constant for liberal democracies. You're always going to have changes of government. You're always going to have changes of personnel, and it's part of the challenges that liberal democracies face that autocracies don't face, I suppose. It's the fact that you are always going to have to re-establish or establish people-to-people links at the highest decision-making level, but that's why it's even more important to have long-term diplomatic relationships, and in the case of the UAE, that long-term military footprint in the region, even though it's at a low level, that's a really important sign of permanency from Australia to the region. I'll probably leave it at that.
Great, thank you for that. So, Roland, in your presentation, in your response to the question, you talked about, actually not asking a question, I'm just referring to what you said. It's okay. So you referred to Australian foreign policy in the region as sometimes not following Australian national interests, but other countries' national interests. What do you mean by that? You're getting it right now.
Before I respond to your question, it's important for me to also add something to my previous comments, and that is, in my experience working in this space, and I've worked with many of our diplomats and public servants, and I have always been impressed by our people punching above their weight, working with such limited resources and achieving magnificent outcomes with those limited resources. So the sense of frustration was not so much to do with the people who have been at the forefront of exploring and maximizing that potential and that relationship. It is true, I think, what the professor said, that we do have a much better understanding of the region, and also the region has a much better understanding of us as well. And often, you know, we used to be faced with a situation of a delegation going from Victoria the week before, someone from South Australia, and people there would say to us, "Weren't you here last week?" And now they can understand the difference between the different states. I mean, that's another area that obviously requires a lot of work, and that is our coordination, a multi-pronged approach. We currently have a fragmented approach because of our federal state system as well. But in terms of foreign policy, I think what I have observed over the years, and although I do understand the reasoning behind our ANZUS treaty and our relationship with the United States and why we need to have that relationship, although our politicians happen to express a different view when they're no longer in government, and it's not a view that they normally express while they're in government. It's like some of the views by our former politicians. Why do we need to go to the other end of the world to have an alliance with the United States to protect us from our neighbour? Shouldn't we have the alliance with our neighbour? And these are the words of former prime ministers and former foreign ministers of Australia. Now, I feel that, as I said, although I understand the reasons, and the pillar of our foreign policy is our ancestry with the United States, and that obviously comes with certain obligations, and we have always been at the forefront of fulfilling those obligations. Those actions by us as a nation have not always been in our national interest. They may have served the United States' national interest, at least from their perspective, but they were definitely not aligned with our national interest. And I can give a number of examples: Afghanistan, Iraq, Vietnam, and the list can go on. And unfortunately, the United States doesn't learn from history. They keep repeating the same mistakes, not we happen to be dragged along. As I said, as a result of our so-called shared values, with the United States and our, alliance with the United States, that we need to be out there, if you like. As I said, although I do understand why we do have that alliance, and I'm not suggesting for a minute that we should have the United States as our enemy, but I think we should. I mean, New Zealand is a very good example, of maintaining that alliance, but at the same time drawing the line in terms of how far do we go in terms of fulfilling our obligations for that alliance.
Oh, thanks for that. Now, Sally, would you mind reflecting on that very question of how Australia's national interests fit in or not with the US interest in the Middle East?
Sure. Look, I think it's a complex relationship, and as Roland has said, Australia has to realise where its place in the world is, and it does need a big superpower, so its friend. There's no point, I guess, upsetting the United States. That never goes well for anybody, and so it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act between making sure that we're, I guess, upholding the expectations that the United States has of us, and the expectations that perhaps we have of ourselves, and pushing our own national interest. And so most of the time those interests align. Sometimes, like being dragged into Afghanistan or Iraq, perhaps not so much. But I think in certain things, and we'll probably talk about it later, but like Israel-Palestine, Australia perhaps, might have its own views that it would like to express, but chooses not to because of that relationship. And I think it's that self-censoring that perhaps might be the biggest issue that we face with our relationship with the US.
That's a nice segue to my next question, Sally. I'm going to go back to James, if you don't mind. And that's about what Australia is doing in promoting the international rule of law in the protracted Arab-Israeli conflict, Arab-Palestinian conflict, Israel-Palestinian conflict, I should say.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think people might be surprised that we don't talk all the time with the US or take our cues from them on these issues. I mean, we talk with the Israelis, and we talk with the Palestinians, and we talk with a whole range of like-mindeds, and we look at what others do. There's a whole range of calculations that go into decision-making, including how we vote and the positions we take on, Israeli-Palestinian issues. I mean, an underwriting sort of position of successive Australian governments, this one and the last one and everyone before it, has been our support for a two-state solution. And, that's the sort of framework that the international community has set up for how this conflict, ought to be dealt with and resolved. It's enshrined in UNSC resolutions and reflected in the Oslo Accords. And it really guides our approach to a whole range of things. I think if you look at the last year, a lot happening in Israel and the Palestinian territories. A number of statements from the Foreign Minister and from the Australian government, including in the UN, particularly focused on unilateral actions, whether they be by the Israelis or the Palestinians, that undermine the prospects of such a solution. The Foreign Minister's called for the parties to do much more to create the conditions for peace and ultimately to return to the negotiating table, even though that looks quite remote at the current moment in time. People will be aware that there's been a few shifts in policy in the last year, and I'm sure you're interested to hear about them. Look, I mean, recently, you're aware that the government's called Israeli settlement building in the occupied Palestinian territories illegal. I mean, that's consistent with the position of a number of people, a number of our like-minded, the UN, NGOs and others. But, most importantly, it's consistent with the UNSC's position and their most recent resolution of 2016 is 2334. It found settlement activity to be illegal, and so very much in line with, the international community and the UN, and also our own, legal position on that thing. Change in nomenclature. Similarly, it reflects the situation on the ground as we see it, and also our underlying legal position. There's been a few other changes in the past year for those who watched the file carefully. And of course, changes of votes in the UN General Assembly is a big one. We shifted vote on about 5 resolutions, well, exactly 5 resolutions late last year, and we're actually coming into UNGA season again now. So it's something my team is working on. But, those shifts in votes were, look, I should say actually that there are some issues with the way this issue is sort of dealt with in the UN. There's around 20 resolutions focused on it, and that, far exceeds the number of resolutions focused on any other situation or issue. So there's sort of an inherent problem, I think, in the way the issue is dealt with both there and also in the Human Rights Council. And so, Australia is guided by a few things, including, opposition to, anti-Israel bias. But we're more than anything guided by our support for a two-state solution. And the shifts in both, if you look at them carefully, were on some of the core questions that go to the heart of the conflict, and also our position. And that's, Palestinian right to self-determination, peaceful settlement of the conflict, and also a resolution to do with Israeli settlement activity in the West Bank. There's a couple of other resolutions too, but really they sit at the core of the issue, and I think our positions are very much in line with, the UNSC's.
Okay. Sally, would you like to respond to that? What Australia's role in promoting rule of law?
I think, as James said, there's been some significant shifts over the last 12 months. I think last month, the change to call it the occupied Palestinian territories was a big one, and certainly sending a signal of where the Australian government, sees the conflict at this point. I think there is probably more that could be done. But again, it is that, and, James is more across this than I am, but a very slowly kind of approach, and very much a balancing act. But, it's been 30 years, actually 30 years on Saturday, since the Oslo Accords were signed. And so I think that idea of a two-state solution might be a fantasy that the international community is still holding on to. The reality on the ground with the increased settlements, actually what the map on the ground looks like. Look, personally, I don't think a two-state solution is viable. I don't think there's enough mutually agreed land swaps possible to make a two-state solution viable. And so while we hold on to that fantasy, as does most of the international community, I think if we really want to see a Palestinian state and a true two-state solution, we need to actually, be taking a different approach, because what we've been doing for the last 30 years hasn't worked. And so things like the Australian government perhaps calling a Palestinian state rather than the occupied Palestinian territories would be a really very big and clear message about what the expectations are for a future Palestinian state. And I'll just wait for the hate mail.
Thank you for that. Well, hang on to the mic, Sally, because I'm staying with you with the next question. And that's to do with Australia's military engagement in the region. We were involved in Afghanistan, we were combating ISIS. What have we learned from that experience? How can we use that experience to our advantage?
Gosh, look, Australia always acquits itself very well when it, I guess, engages in the Middle East, whether it's World War I or II or the Gulf interventions. Australia's heavily involved in peacekeeping missions, or has been traditionally, and is still involved in some of them. I think, I hope we've learned the lesson that perhaps we should, perhaps reassess what our partners are doing, perhaps, and try and talk them out of some of the things that they're doing. I think one of the things, though, that we don't do that perhaps we could do more of is to look at some of those conflicts that are ongoing, things like the war in Yemen, for instance, that are having a huge humanitarian toll, and see how not necessarily military intervention, but other forms of intervention might help bring about a stability and a peace in that respect. And, we do focus on those big items like Ukraine, but there's always stuff happening in the Middle East that gets overshadowed. It doesn't get the same amount of media coverage, and it doesn't get the same amount of government attention either. And so I think that's something that we could be doing differently. Whether that's a lesson we've learned, I don't know, but I'm very hopeful that going forward, that's something that we might think about to bring about that stability that we want and that sort of global, I guess, overarching goals that we have. The countries in the Middle East that are most affected by those issues are the ones that we should be engaging with more.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Roger, would you like to reflect on what lessons we have learned?
Yeah, probably a couple, and I'll show my hand to start with. I think the intervention in Afghanistan was, justified. There was really no other alternative than a military intervention into Afghanistan, given what had been inflicted upon the United States. Now, the execution of that intervention over the subsequent 20 years, that's a different argument that you could have. But I'm also, at the same time, the intervention into Iraq, was flawed and the wrong decision from the start. So I don't think we should be lumping them both together. Afghanistan was justifiable, executed in the end not well, and Iraq a different story. I'll take this along a different pathway, I suppose, is that a couple of things that emerged out of our participation over 20 years in far off lands is it just reinforced once again the unpredictable nature of security threats. So my time in the army, with the various white papers that have come out, there would not be a white paper that correctly predicts what is going to happen because the future is inherently unpredictable. So you need flexibility of approach to a whole range of things, and that's including how you structure yourself for defence. So thinking that you can tell what the next threat is going to be and structuring your force specifically for that is a fool's errand. You have to have a weight in one direction, but you also have to have the ability to do a whole range of things that the world will call upon you to do. And bizarrely enough, one of the things that came out of our interventions, first of all in Afghanistan, but then in Iraq, was our complete focus on defending Australia meant that we couldn't actually deploy forces effectively very far offshore or sustain them. What that has meant that when our focus is now back on the region, when you look at things like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the greater Asia-Pacific region, which we have done on a number of occasions, and the military is able to assist in that significantly, the kind of equipment that we buy that gives you Australia's strategic reach, so C-17 aircraft, the large helicopter landing ships, gives you strategic reach, not necessarily for conflict, but as strategic reach in terms of Australia's footprint in the region. Oftentimes, for better, if you're assisting regional countries, that floating piece of Australia that you can bring to assist in the aftermath of a disaster is the kind of credit that Australia can bank that would not have happened unless we were forced to understand our shortfalls in terms of equipment. I think one of the other issues that it again reinforced for us, our military interventions, is the closeness of the relationship with the United States. As Roland alluded to it, was it too close? I think in some instances, yes, it was too close. That doesn't disavow the absolute rationale for having a close security relationship with the United States. And I think what has come out in the last 3 to 5 years is that notion that liberal democracies have approaches to the world that the commonalities of those approaches are things that should be protected in a way that regional neighbours or a close trading partner, for instance, in China in this instance, our willingness to get too close to China too quickly, I think people are now looking askance at that and saying, well, having a close trading relationship is fine, but perhaps that's as close as two countries get if their political systems, one being a liberal democracy and the other one being an autocracy of differing kinds, will always have a natural barrier to the closest of relations. And I suppose bringing it back to the Middle East, I think from a political perspective, that's also one of the things that will probably, for a long time in the future, limit the closeness of countries in Australia, like Australia and other liberal democracies, and countries in the region that are not liberal democracies. A close relationship that can never be the same closeness as two liberal democracies.
Great, thank you. Now, we talked about trade with the region. Moving on to the next question, and how significant it is for Australia to maintain its trade ties. We did also note that culture is important, cultural links are important. And I wonder if I could ask Roland to reflect on whether we have got the balance right. Is Australia neglecting other aspects that it can foster and develop in relations with the Middle East? Specifically culture.
If I may, Professor, with your permission,
Please.
if I may just make some comments about the last
Of course.
topic. Just very briefly, I asked a question as a nation, as an Australian, does our intervention and invasion of Iraq and the killing of 500,000 innocent civilians compatible with our values as a nation, referring to them as collateral damage? Is the violation of human rights every day in Palestine and our complete silence on this issue is compatible with our values as a nation? Now, we are more royal than the king in terms of pursuing our foreign policy and our alliance with the United States. That is just simply a simple question. Are they aligned with our values as a nation? I don't believe so. I don't need to be politically correct. I'm not a politician. I'm not a public servant. And I appreciate the comment by some of the panelists here today, and I support and I admire Professor Sully's comments about accepting consequences, because the shortest way to end your political career here is to be pro-Palestine and anti-Israel. That's the shortest way to end a political career. So coming back to the culture, when I served on the Council for Australian Arab Relations, we prepared a kit to talk about Australia and to talk about our culture here, because we felt that that was an important issue. There's a lot of misconception and there's a lot of stereotyping of the region for us here. We tend to put all of the region in one basket, and I was having a brief conversation with James before. And I said, you know, you must be in a good place because you are in charge of an area and you've been involved in some of the hottest issues there, so you'll have the context, you'll understand the environment you're functioning in. It's very important. Some of us go and live in the area for a couple of years and we come back and we want to write a book about the Arab world. So it is very complicated, it is very diverse, but we tend to have a general perception of the region and we lump it all in one basket. And I'll mention a small incident happened to me that probably gives you a clearer understanding of what I'm trying to say. I chaired the Australian Arabic Council. I received a call and my personal assistant had a grin on her face and she said, you need to take this call. And it was from a school teacher in New South Wales. In fact, the principal, not a school teacher. She said, we're having an activity at school and we're looking for 2 camels. And I said, and you are calling me? Any reason why you're calling me? She said, aren't you the chairman of the Australian Arabic Council? I said, yes. I said, I've never seen a camel in my life. I said, I was born in Lebanon. There are no camels there. I've never seen a camel when I was a kid before I came here. So that just gives you an understanding that the culture is an issue. Yes, we do not have a sophisticated understanding of the region. That is improving. We know more about the region now because of unfortunately, for the wrong reasons, because of terrorism and because of our involvement in Iraq and Afghanistan and so on. So we did develop a kit to describe and to talk about our culture. And we obviously had to provide a lot of cultural input as to what would be perceived. And that was a kit to be taught at schools in the Gulf region. Because the same way we don't know enough about that part of the world, that part of the world also doesn't know too much about us. They think Australia is Pauline Hanson. They are the bits of news that filter to them. So they have no concept of the level of diversity and the level of engagement and the level of inclusion that we have as a nation in terms of our diversity and multiculturalism. So it is very important. And I speak often at the police national conferences about policing and multiculturalism. In order for police to be effective in policing a community, they need to understand that community, especially when the composition of our police force is not reflective of the level of diversity in that community. So, of course, for us to succeed in engaging effectively and developing strategic long-term relationships with the region, we need to have a better understanding, cultural understanding. Often people say to me when we attend meetings there, they come back and they say, oh, that went really well. And I say, why? But he said, Inshallah. I said, yes, Inshallah is a polite no in Arabic, because in Arabic culture, it's impolite to tell people no. And I teach my staff, if you can't help, you don't say no, you say, I'll do my best. Inshallah is a polite way of saying, I'm not going to commit or no. So you need to understand, often we come back with two different impressions of what happened in the meeting. So the better you understand the people you want to engage with, the better you're likely to come up with better results, most definitely.
Thank you so much.
And that's, as I said, goes both ways.
Yes, it does go both ways. Could I please ask James to also reflect on whether there is a scope for doing more than just trade with the region, especially in terms of cultural ties? Are there avenues to explore cultural exchanges between Australia and the Middle East?
Look, I think it's possible. Roland's talked about the Council of Arab-Australian Relations, and I think that's, in terms of the work that DFAT does, that's sort of our primary vessel for that sort of thing. Hopefully cultural exchange will flow from increasing people-to-people links and the kind of things that we're seeing. Take the UAE, for instance, the relationship's really grown. I think there's something like 15,000 or more Australians who call the UAE home, working in a range of different fields. Increasingly, Emirati students are coming to Australia on scholarships, hundreds, I think, each year. And so as those people-to-people links sort of grow, I'm sure there'll be sort of cultural dividends. But like I say, in terms of my division and the Middle East branch, the council is, a primary focus, but I think we're always open to good ideas on how we can help to foster that sort of exchange. I know our embassies around the region, they have public diplomacy programs. A lot of those will be focused on cultural activities and increasing those sort of cultural linkages. All our ambassadors wish they had more money to spend on that kind of thing because they're just so well received. So, and in some cases, they've made a case to get more money for that. I think we'll keep looking for opportunities and we welcome ideas from people too.
Fantastic, thank you. Well, these are all the questions I had for the panel. Now I'd like to open the floor to questions from the floor. There's already a hand up there. We need to give you a mic. So if you don't mind, take this and then pass it on to the next. Thanks. Oh, good, thanks.
Alistair, in the intro, used the greeting Salam Alaikum. I had a Iraqi client today and I said that to him. And he corrected me very quickly. He said, I'm Iraqi Christian. Now, can perhaps the gentlemen who are Indigenous to the region, can you please tell me what's the protocol about when you use the greeting Salam Alaikum? Do you need to actually make sure that your interlocutor is actually Muslim before you use that? He was a little bit upset that I used it.
Assalamu alaikum means I happen to speak Arabic as well. Peace upon you. This is a greeting that is often used in Islamic countries, in the Islamic world. It's not to say that as a Christian you wouldn't use that term, because it basically means peace upon you.
Well, he said to me, I don't use it with me, I'm a Christian, Iraqi
Exactly.
Christian. He actually said that.
Exactly. As I said, it is often used in Islamic countries. When Muslims greet each other, my Muslim friend will greet me with Assalamu alaikum. I say, hi, how are you? Or I say, good afternoon, happen to be a Christian. And
Peace be upon him, it means for somebody passed away.
no, peace upon you. I am greeting you. That's what it means. I am greeting you. I am wishing you peace. I am wishing peace upon you. That's what it means. But it's often used, as I said, in an Islamic community environment, not in a Christian. If you went to East Beirut, for example, you're not going to hear that term.
What do you hear instead?
Hi,
Hi.
Bonjour.
or bonjour, or bonsoir, or monsieur. You have to speak French.
Okay.
There's a lot of contradictions, and that's why I was referring to the diversity. It is so diverse and contradicting.
So just to clarify, so should I not say that to somebody until I've established that they're actually Muslim?
I don't think you'd offend anybody by using that greeting, but as I said, it's not often used amongst Christians.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Could I just jump in and ask one as I got the microphone and I handed on? Last month at the BRICS summit in Johannesburg, they talked about expanding BRICS membership and talking now about the BRICS +6 and the 6 new members that they're talking about admitting, one Saudi Arabia, one's UAE, and also Iran. Do you think that's a sign that the West or the US is being seen as disengaging from the region? Is there a risk there that we're going to start losing influence, or is there an opportunity for Australia to start going and building better relations?
I'm going to ask Sally to respond to that question.
I think it's important to note it's an invitation. So we have to wait and see if there's acceptance and how that works. And, I guess, does BRICS really do anything? Is it just something that you sign on to and it looks good, for a country to be part of that? For countries like Iran, perhaps it is a bit of a lifeline, another friend, another, foot into the international community. For countries like perhaps Saudi Arabia or UAE, if they were to accept that is sending a signal to the United States. And we'll have to wait and see if they choose to send that signal or not.
Any other thoughts before we go to the next question? Please.
Yeah, I'd agree with what Sally said there. Let's just wait and see about that. There is a sense with the BRICS that it's a bit like that bar scene from Star Wars of a whole range of countries that have very little in common with each other than wanting to be part of a group that isn't dominated by the West. So how much unity that kind of grouping could ever generate is extremely questionable. So the invitation is probably more important than anything that emerges from it.
Okay. You want to respond to this question?
I think there's a clear shift in terms of the influence of the United States in certain parts of the world, and I think that's become more evident since the Ukraine war. I think we're seeing that on a number of fronts. There's been a number of attempts now to move away from using the US dollar in terms of trade exchange between certain countries, moving more towards using local currencies. I think the Ukraine war, made it clear now that there's been attempts for a number of years now to try and move away and to create a bloc, if you like, so that the world is not dominated by the US, and that's obviously driven by China and by Russia. So there's clear shift now by moving away. I think we saw the peace arrangements which were reached between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which were brokered by China. That has a new development. So there's more than one sign pointing in that direction.
Do you think there's a BRIC bloc coming?
There's no question about the fact that there is a shift in that direction, and there is an attempt to create a bloc so that the dominance of the United States is not as effective as it's been to date.
Thank you. James, would you like
Oh, could I just say, I mean, I think what we have seen obviously is China stepping up its engagement in the region, and also Russia to a degree. But the question of US retrenchment is sort of an interesting one and a debated one. Certainly, you know, one way that we look at it, even during the Trump administration, we saw a really active diplomatic effort around the Abraham Accords, which I think have been, you know, a positive, obviously not perfect in every respect, and it hasn't delivered dividends for everyone it might have, but really a positive diplomatic initiative. We saw last year as well a maritime boundary agreement between something almost unthinkable between Israel and Lebanon. You know, it was acquiesced to by Hezbollah, and the conservatives in Israel are okay with it. You know, it remains in place. That was through sort of dogged hard work by the Americans from the Trump administration through to the Biden administration. And so I think it just goes to show the US hasn't sort of vacated the field by any stretch, and they still play a really important role. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Zoe, please.
I'd like to know a bit more about Lebanon and where it is now. Everything I read shows that it seems to have had, it's got terrible inflation. It had that terrible explosion. Does it have the political will? It's very divided. There's Hezbollah. Is it a country that is going to be, is it a failed state, or is it going to be able to sort itself out?
I think I mentioned the word contradiction, and I think that's a word that applies to Lebanon. I remember during the civil war in Lebanon, one of our ambassadors that went to Lebanon after the civil war, Ian Parmenter, he came back for debriefing. He said, I feel safer walking the streets of Beirut at night than I do in Bankstown. That was during the civil war in Lebanon. Because the pictures we see on TV here, that Lebanon is a complete destruction. Yet people are at nightclubs only about 10 meters away till 4 o'clock in the morning while war is raging in this area. So it's a very, very complicated and very contradicting place in the world. Yes, Lebanon is facing challenges after the civil war that this ended more than 30 years ago. There is religious divide. That's how the system is based in Lebanon. The head of the parliament needs to be a Shiite, the prime minister a Sunni, the president is a Maronite, the deputy prime minister is an Orthodox. So it's a fairly complicated structure driven by various factors and elements. Lebanon is facing many challenges at the moment. It's very close to being a failed state. The currency of Lebanon for $1 was equivalent to 1,500 Lebanese pounds only about a year ago, just over a year ago. It's currently 100,000 Lebanese pounds. Yet you can go to Lebanon now. 2 million people visited Lebanon. Lebanon is a population of 4.5 million plus 2.5 million Syrian refugees and 500,000 Palestinians. Yet this summer, 2 million people visited Lebanon. All hotels are booked. All restaurants are booked. You can hardly drive because of the traffic, and yet Lebanon is on the edge of collapsing economically, politically, and in terms of its institutions. It just continues to tick. $7 billion are transferred to Lebanon from Lebanese living abroad. There's 12 million Lebanese living abroad, and there's 4.5 million living in Lebanon. So it's a very complicated, very complex place. And it's very difficult to know where this country is heading, but definitely not heading to a good place.
Most of those businesses would be coming from the diaspora.
Only about 40% of them. 60% are coming from neighboring countries, Arab countries, and European countries as well. If you go to Lebanon today, you wouldn't notice that there is anything going on in Lebanon at all. The people of Lebanon gotten used to living without a government. The government's role now is being condensed to collecting some taxes and struggling to pay public servants. That's the extent of the function of the Lebanese government at the moment.
So who fixes the roads?
Nobody. MTV does some work. some individuals, you know.
But you're saying when we go there, it seems normal.
Yes.
The roads are all not working.
Well, you probably notice an MTV truck that is driving around and filling holes in some of the roads, patching them.
Okay, there's a question at the back. Thank you.
Hi there. Just wanted to bring it back to Australian foreign policy and asking about two things: the re-election of Erdogan and then the reintegration of Assad in the region, and how those two things the panel sees as playing a role in short to mid-term foreign policy.
I'm sorry, I can't answer your question on Erdogan. I don't focus on Turkey, and we don't include it in our branch.
But it plays a role in the region.
No, that's true, and particularly in Syria. But I think I can answer your second question if you don't mind. Look, I mean, a group of Arab states have obviously brought Assad back into the fold, and they've got their own particular interests. Jordan is one of those that was particularly active in that, and they host some million Syrian refugees. I think there's a growing sort of smuggling issue over their border involving people and also drugs and so forth. So they obviously have their interests that they're trying to look after. However, the Australian government's not supportive of this move. The Assad regime has been responsible for some incredibly egregious human rights violations, and they go on. And there's not been any meaningful progress from what we can see on the political track in line with UNSC Resolution 2254. I think it's hard to see what the dividend is for that political process from his reintegration into the Arab League. So, we accept that other countries have their own interests and they've got more skin in the game perhaps than we do, but it's not something that the Australian government's supportive of.
Would you like to respond to that question? Please.
I think the reintegration of Assad is just the political reality of where the world is. It's 12 years after the Arab Spring. He's still president of the country. Perhaps has less control than he used to. But for the Arab countries, as James said, it's a practical matter. They're really hoping for the repatriation of the Syrian refugees that are in their countries back, particularly countries like Jordan and Lebanon. And they're hoping that by, throwing Assad a bone and reintegrating that, that'll make that possible, in the coming years. In terms of Turkey, look, Erdogan is a strongman politician. The region used to be full of them. It's got fewer than it used to. But you look at Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. There's not a lot of difference between them in many respects. Western countries are quite happy to deal with MBS. Erdogan is really the same. And I think you have to, in a practical sense, deal with the people who are in charge. You can't have the world that you wish for. You have to, deal with the world as it is. And I think that's really what's going on.
I just said very quickly about Syria as well, and I think probably reinforce what James said previously. Regional states have much different view of dealing with Assad than countries much further away like Australia. There's criticism of Jordan or from Jordan about the idea of any kind of rapprochement with Assad never delivers any dividends, doesn't force any domestic policy change from Assad, so we shouldn't expect any from him. If you take that calculation into account for regional states, that will drive what kind of policy you're going to have towards Assad, very pragmatic one. If you're further afield, like Australia, it doesn't have to drive it. If you expect there's not going to be any dividend from reintegrating Assad, then why do it, given what James has pointed out, what's hanging over him and his complete inability to adhere to any of the requirements of the UN Security Council resolution.
There's a question at the front. Thank you.
Thanks. Just keen to pick up a couple of points that I guess have been reiterated in different ways. So contradiction And it was mentioned before that perhaps as a liberal democracy, we shouldn't get too close with other states who don't share the same, apart from when it comes to trade. Just keen to understand some, I guess, thoughts on the contradictions in how we trade with certain states and not others, and how we use trade sanctions against some Middle Eastern countries and not others, particularly obviously Iran, which has had significant sanctions actually to the detriment of its people, not its regime.
I might just kick off that. I mean, one of the, the normal response to the first part of the question is if, liberal democracies only traded with liberal democracies, everybody's economy would collapse. So it's just the harsh reality of the world that in Australia's case, largest trading partner is not a liberal democracy. That having been said, we're now much more aware of the pitfalls of trading with an autocratic regime if you have political issues with that country. And I think, as was highlighted previously, I think it's been a good lesson for Australia, and finding those alternate markets for barley in the Middle East. It hopefully gave private enterprise a wake-up call that, yes, might be very easy to trade with China, but you need to diversify because you never know what's around the corner, in the security sphere as well. In the second issue about Iran, it is, Shahran's probably the person to speak to this as well, but the peculiarities of the unilateral sanctions on Iran means that countries' hands are tied in many respects, because you don't want to fall afoul of US secondary sanctions in dealing with either elements of listed or sanctioned individuals or companies in Iran, where it's very murky about the ultimate ownership or participation in those. So you might fall foul of secondary US sanctions in dealing with it. So the cautious approach, and which is exactly what the policy desire of it was when the US put it in, is that you won't trade if there's the risk outweighs the returns of doing it. So it's unfair, and I don't really know a way around it. And my view is that one of the idea of under the Trump administration of coming out of of wrecking the JCPOA was because once he wrecked it, it would be too hard for it ever to be put back again. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment, largely, although the Biden administration seems to be edging not closer to the JCPOA, which I think is probably dead, but something kind of not JCPOA-ish, but gives the US some kind of guarantees that there is some kind of limitations on Iran's nuclear development, which I think is the ultimate policy goal of the US. It's how to achieve it with an acknowledgement that JCPOA is effectively dead.
So is this another policy example or diplomatic example where we've been led by America?
Where we've been led by, I don't know that we've been led by, it's just there's no way around it. So we're a victim of it in sorts.
Where we were perhaps led by America.
Say again, sorry.
We were a victim of the original structure, which was perhaps led by America.
You mean the current sanctions regime?
Yeah.
Listen, I agree with that.
James, would you like to reflect on that?
Well, I think there are sanctions that we've imposed on Iran for almost 15 years that we UNSC mandated. But I mean, if you look at the last year, we've imposed 3 big tranches of sanctions in response to the Iranian government's, brutal crackdown on protesters and violence and the executions of protesters. It's been a very difficult situation. You talk about the broader impact. I mean, sanctions are imposed on entities and individuals responsible for these breaches, and the team next to me goes through in painstaking detail looking at those individuals and looking at the cases against them. I think the US wasn't banging down the door telling us to impose these sanctions. In fact, the Iranian community here has been very active and very vocal And, you know, it's been one of the many responses that we've made to, you know, the crackdown and the horrible behaviour of the Iranian government over the last year. But like I say, I mean, they target entities, you know, the morality police and the Basij and elements of the IRGC, and individuals responsible for these, you know, abuses. So, yeah.
Okay, there's a question in the front. Please, there's a mic behind you.
No, it doesn't, because
That's okay. It's okay too.
Thank you, Professor Shahram, and all the officials. I'm starting about the sanction. Iran sanction is over than 42 years. But this is the slogan. Why? Because during this time, for example, when they want to bring gyro is an essential equipment to extract the oil indirectionally from the wheel, they can send from the factory to the Canada to Norway, Norway to Oman, Oman sent to Iran. And the expenses will be borne by the poor people of Iranian. The government doesn't affect nothing. This is about the sanction is a slogan like, for example, when there is a summit, for example, longest summit is for climate change. As a number is around 12,000 people attending the climate change. When the summit and conference is finished, what's going on? They are respecting the regulation? No, because they are pushing and pressing the OPEC and OPEC Plus to produce more oil. Come back to your beginning, mention your comment. When you are talking about the Middle East, you mentioned about the oil. Oil is not the value. The value is for the culture, human, value, history, and this is the behavior, the people. The Middle East people.
Sorry, can you please ask a question?
Question is exactly the question is the first question is when we are talking about Middle East, we should looking for the national interest of the Australia, because when they are the superpower, they are sanction Iran and the other country, they are not doing the same way. But what I am questioning, the question is Australia is gold, Middle East is oil. It doesn't need to make a publicity for the Australia, because every people, even for example, right now from the Middle East, if you open for example, for the tourism activity, they are coming 10 million from Iran. Okay. My exact question about the James, what is your suggestion and your idea about the Lebanon, because Lebanon is dominated like a Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia. Right now they finished in the Yemen. Now they are going to the Lebanon. What is your comment about the Lebanon?
Okay, thank you. Just perhaps
jump in and say something on that you raised.
Yes.
You raised a point about the sanctions and how it's impacting the Iranian people, and I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things about sanctions is that they don't work. Everybody says they worked on South Africa. They were, what a great example. One example out of like all the countries that we've ever put sanctions on. And so I think the question is, what are we trying to achieve with Iran? And, is sanctions the best way? Because as you said, there's been sanctions on for 30 years, 40 years. So the question really is about, what is it we want from Iran and how can we achieve that? And obviously we can't roll back the sanctions because they're on there and we've said they'll be on there until you do X. But Iran can't do that. And I think the most important point about sanctions, which we never ever talk about, is that it's actually not affecting the government. It's affecting the Iranians and the people. And it's causing, huge, issues around poverty and access to important medicines and food and machinery, and they're not working. And I think Roger's point earlier about that secondary sanctions, that's the thing that actually really has the kick. And so it's not the sanctions on Iran necessarily that are the problem, it's that firms dealing. So America has all different sorts of sanctions that they put on, and there's this one box that's called, I think, firms dealing. I'm not sure that's the proper term, but and it means that if you deal with a firm that deals with Iran, you can't deal with the United States. And so, for instance, Mercedes-Benz, they're not going to sell to Iran, engines and things like that, because they want to deal with the United States, which is a much bigger market. And that goes for all the companies in the world, and it goes for all the governments. And so it's those secondary sanctions that have the real bite, but we don't tend to talk about those. But I think when we talk about sanctions, we really need to say, what are we trying to achieve, and how can we actually achieve it in a different way, because this isn't working. Sorry to jump on your question, but I just wanted to raise that because everyone talks about sanctions, and I think it's important to say.
Thank you, Sally. And you are on the sanction because there are 3 gentlemen and you are alone. It is not equality.
Okay.
No, because 1 woman equals 4 men.
All right. Women power. James, would you like to say something on the sanctions, or you've said enough? All right, moving on to the next question, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much. Very interesting comments and discussion. My name is Mohammed. I'm Palestinian. My question is to James, what would you consider the 3 main priorities of Australia's engagement in the Middle East, other than foreign investment? So that's the first one. Second one, do you think Australia would be sending or is sending confusing messages to people in the Middle East about its engagement and the goal behind that engagement in time where, we feel that those messages are a bit contradicting? For example, sanctions on Iran, at the same time praising its relationship with Israel. And also with other countries complaining about human rights in Saudi Arabia, for example, which we see in a lot, that the West complains about Saudi Arabia records in human rights, but at the same time, they're competing to sell Saudi Arabia more weapons, right? And that's, I think, more on the human rights, Australia's stand on human rights in the Middle East. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the human rights question is a tricky one. Obviously, we have an agenda.
All the easy questions.
we have an agenda to promote and protect human rights. Look, there's different ways though that you can respond when you have concerns. Obviously, we've taken a certain path with Iran. We've talked about that enough, so I won't continue on that path. We have concerns with human rights in other parts of the Middle East, clearly. But there's different ways of going about that. It can be through sort of our engagement in the UN or Human Rights Council that we express our concern, call for change. We have regular, dialogue with the Saudis, for instance. And the Assistant Foreign Minister was just there on a visit a couple of months ago. He met a whole range of figures. He also met the Saudi, I can't remember the name of the Human Rights Commission, sort of equivalent, talked about these issues. It's certainly something that's on the agenda often when our embassy speaks to Saudi officials. But, it's not all sort of stick with these things. There's, there are positives that these governments are trying to do often. And I think it's also, Australia's job to try to support and encourage those things where they can. The reform agenda in Saudi is really quite staggering, and they've reached out to us for discussions and assistance on things like disability inclusion, how to build skills and so forth. So, there's a positive way we can try to affect change in places, but there's also concerns we have with human rights, and we'll voice them in different ways. I hope that answers your question. I mean, your first question about the 3 sort of priorities, I think I kind of set that out in my first answer right at the top. We look at the economic side of things, but there's also security engagement, a lot of investment in bilateral relationships also. So we do that sort of directly with those countries. And the Assistant Foreign Minister's visit to Saudi Arabia, also Lebanon, and the UAE recently is an example of that.
Thank you, please.
Yeah, I just add a little bit to what James said there before. And Saudi is kind of a good example of the tricky issues for governments to deal with on terms of human rights, and US and Europeans who, and everybody else who firmly plant blame for the murder of Jamal Khashoggi at the seat of the Crown Prince on the one hand, which means in a perfect world who would be anathema as a result of that. On the other hand, he's leading Saudi Arabia's modernisation in quite staggering speed of social change, kind of social change that the West has been trying to urge for decades but has never occurred. So on one hand, do you cut him adrift because of what he has done, which is, as we said, anathema to our core values? But on the other hand, he's going to be in charge of that country probably half a century, and he's ushering in a whole range of social changes that at the macro level is what Australia and other countries have been quietly asking for. So is the country going to be a better country at the end of that than it was at the start of his reign? And what should Australia's approach be to it? These are really difficult questions. And in a perfect world, as I said before, you would have nothing to do with him, cut him adrift and cut the country adrift. But it's not a perfect world, and we live in a world where you have to deal with countries that are a reality. And I suppose that's not giving you an answer, but that's just highlighting the kind of difficult questions that governments have to deal with that individuals at talks like this don't have to deal with.
So we have time for one last question. Was there a question at the back? Okay, so if you don't mind passing the mic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up from that accepting of different governments and the way that the Taliban has been sort of slowly, gradually normalised, and where that leaves women's rights and more broadly women's rights in the region, and this idea that we're working with the players and the cards that we're dealt, and what Australia would see its role, or what you would see its role in dealing with these kind of actors and dealing with issues like women's rights in places like the Middle East in the future.
I mean, I'd say women's rights is one of the reasons why the Taliban hasn't been normalised. If they probably would have had a much better chance of being normalised quicker if they had adhered to women's rights. But the fact they haven't is, I think, one of the issues that's going to block their normalisation with Western countries for a long time to come, or for the foreseeable future. Anyway, normalisation is different to having contact with as well. That's probably what I'd say on that issue, but others will probably have other opinions.
Sandy?
As the token woman. Look, I think women's rights and human rights are one of those things that we all agree are really important and a really great thing. And it's always one of the first things that gets sacrificed in the order of priorities for other things like economics and security. And so I think whether it's Middle East or almost anywhere in the world, when another priority comes in and trumps it, we kind of just turn a blind eye to it. I think no one's got the appetite to go back into Afghanistan and to get rid of the Taliban because they know it's not going to work. It won't hold. It'll be exhausting and expensive and unpopular. And so it's better just to perhaps, turn a blind eye to what's going on there. And we do that a lot. We do it perhaps in Saudi Arabia as well, where women's rights are, nowhere near equal to, women across the region or anywhere else. But for various reasons, that's something that we just choose not to talk about. And so I think, we have a long way to go with women's rights globally, in Australia as well, but globally. And I think it's one of those things where at some point we have to make that decision about human rights and women's rights, that actually it's something that we're, going to stick our ground on, and we'll make sacrifices of other things to show that's a priority. But we are a long way away from that. And certainly in the Middle East, a really long way away from that.
Any final reflections on my right before we close the session?
This is not my area of expertise, but women's rights is a subject that offends me because to me, women's rights are natural rights. Unfortunately, a male-dominated society historically has taken on itself to talk about women's rights. I'm not sure where they got that right from. Women's rights are natural rights. They have them. No one is in a position to talk about them. In fact, even quotas, one against, so what? Could be 4, 5 women. You know, women's rights are natural rights. Really, our backwards, male-dominated societies historically taken the right for themselves to talk about human rights and women's rights. Who are we to talk about women's rights? They have their rights, they're natural rights.
Thank you for that. Right, well, I think you would agree with me that this has been a fascinating discussion. Middle East is a very complex region, as we have heard. There's so many different layers and aspects to the region, linguistically, religiously, geopolitically. So it's really challenging and difficult for a 1.5 hour session to capture and cover all the different topics and issues. But I think we've made a good dent into it. Thanks everyone for contributing and for being with us today. Thank you.